Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first webinar on AI for innovation management. My name is Jesse, and I will be host for today's session. AI is obviously a massively popular topic right now and top of mind for a lot of innovation managers. And with the field moving so quickly, it's hard to keep up with everything. So today we're diving a little bit deeper into the topic of AI, especially for innovation management. And to discuss this, I've got a couple of very exciting guests with us that I'll introduce to you soon. But beforehand, I'll briefly share a couple of points about the logistics of today's session. Our session will consist of let's call it a fireside chat for the first part, and then towards the end of our session, we'll give you in the audience an opportunity to ask questions from our wonderful panelists. So if you have questions, you can feel free to type those in the chat at any point, and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can towards the end of the session. All right, but with that, let's get to the stars of our show today. So Daniel and Lauri, welcome. Could each of you please introduce yourselves and your role? Daniel, do you want to go first?
Sure. So my name is Daniel Käsmeyer. I work at BASF, which is a large company in the chemistry space. And there I am in central research. So we do research for all the business units, but we also have some corporate topics there. And I've been in that area for, 15 years. I started as a technology scout, and I started the ideation platform. This is also how I got into touch with Hype. And now I'm in the team called Innovation Management and Knowledge Management, and I'm looking more on the community side of things. So we're running a community program, trying to get people together and make communities much better. But I still run the ideation platform, and knowledge management is also very interesting.
Awesome, thanks, Lauri.
Cool. Yeah. So my name is Lauri Järvilehto. I'm a professor of practice at Aalto University in the field of technology ventures. I've been last couple of years, or about 4 years or so, I was the director of Aalto Ventures program, so overseeing the startup entrepreneurship program in Aalto. I've been an entrepreneur for 22 years. I've started 5 different companies in various industries like music, games, like information technology, consulting, stuff like that. So basically now the last little more than a year and 3 or 4 months, I've actually shifted my research focus quite a bit. So I used to work a lot with research questions concerning how the human mind works, and I've actually published most of my academic work around this topic. And then due to my research, I actually used to be a big AI skeptic, so I didn't think that AI is gonna be all that thing that like Silicon Valley is all about. Until I ended up using ChatGPT, and my first impression was that what I'm seeing there is theoretically impossible, which it basically is with respect to the theories that I was savvy with at that point, and yet it seems to work, at least when it works. So that sort of like really piqued my curiosity, and now the last year and 3 or 4 months, I've been voraciously trying to just dig out everything I can about how the transformer architecture works and what are the sort of like parallels or similarities between how humans process information, at least according to current knowledge. What are the like similarities between developing neural networks for AI and things, discoveries from fields like computational neuroscience, and just trying to understand that I think we're onto something quite interesting here, but also like have a kind of critical attitude about like what are the sort of conclusions you can draw from that. So that's now been pretty much my kind of like full focus, especially after I stepped down from the kind of the bureaucratic side of the university equation at the end of last year.
Great. I think that's actually a great bridge to our first topic. So I'd like to start by just exploring a little bit about what gets you excited about AI in general, and I guess especially in terms of like innovation management. So if we hop back onto you, Daniel, kind of like what is it that you're most excited about?
When you're in the innovation management space, you're always talking about new markets and disruption at one point. And now we're living through something that's super disruptive, or at least potentially disruptive. It moves exponentially, it's fast, and you kind of need to keep up with it just to figure out what it is. And AI seems to be, I mean, we know it. I mean, we used to have this industrial revolution when you replace muscle with machine, right? But brain was never being replaced because brain was becoming more and more valuable. But now we are moving into a disruption where brain is being replaced. And that's quite interesting, of course, from the economic side, from the social side, political side, etc. But while we are doing it, it's so exciting to see and how fast these things go. As Larry was saying, yeah, ChatGPT basically was the thing that made everybody kind of understand where we are. But GPT has been around before, and we did an ideation campaign, I don't know, 6 months before ChatGPT came out, and nobody understood a thing. And then in November, everybody suddenly had ideas. The same with music. I was looking at what Google was doing 2 years ago, and where we are today with AI generated music, including lyrics and singing. It's just so fast. It's crazy. Yeah, I love it.
Cool, Lauri, how about you? I think you briefly touched on this, but anything to add to the previous one?
Yeah, yeah. So the one thing that I'm easily the most fired up about what's going down right now is that there's a really interesting feedback loop in the sort of like research bodies about like what we've learned about how the human mind works. I mean, the last couple of like 2 or 3 decades have been quite transformative about understanding the whole sort of like the dual processing nature, like system one, system two, like modularity or semi-modularity of the human mind, which like, you know, when I went to school, people were taught this idea of the human mind as this monolithic rationalistic thing that, you know, actually doesn't really exist. And then parallel to that, there's the whole literature, like, you know, starting from 1943, the McCullough Pitts paper, where they introduced this whole like logical propositional logic notation for neural networks. And now we're in a point where these two are sort of coalescing into a kind of a shared understanding, and like, because I think we have to be careful about like not humanizing these systems too much, like not putting too much things into them in our imagination that's not there. But having said that, the one thing that I share with Stephen Wolfram, who wrote the spectacular analysis of ChatGPT a while ago, is that one thing that we do know now for a fact, which, you know, a couple of years ago, despite, you know, GPT-2, GPT-3 being around, we do have now a system that's savvy enough in generating human-like language that you can actually have a conversation with it. And that, I think, like, you know, even with GPT-3, it was super easy to get that thing to start, like, you know, just side railing, like, you know, friend of mine, like, spent 20 minutes, like, you know, just teasing it, and it went completely bonkers. And so this whole sort of like, you know, the big kind of leap from reinforcement learning through human feedback and getting these things more tightly constrained has given us also understanding about, like, you know, that, okay, so wow, so we do have this sort of like intricate mathematical model with billions of parameters and basically, like, you know, multiple layers of matrix multiplication, and then it generates this. So what does that actually infer? There's a couple of really cool nuggets you can dig out from this that actually also gives us whole new perspectives about, you know, how do we use language? How do we discuss? How do we think in the first place? And these parallels, like, you know, now kind of like joining hands is something that I find quite exciting about what's going on right now. But it's really hard to, because I think, like, you know, you have to be on one hand, you have to have an open mind enough to be able to embrace this, like, you know, especially the pace in the last autumn was like breakneck pace, in the sense of, like, you know, that almost every week something new happened. And one of my favorite examples is that there was a big discussion with multiple experts from around the world about the inference capabilities of LLMs. And so basically the kind of like the shared understanding was that it sucks. Like, you know, these things aren't great in drawing inference. And I'm still reading tons of, like, you know, basically pretty well written papers that start from this premise that LLMs can't do inference, which technically, if you know how the architecture works, they even shouldn't be able to do. That's, like, you know, sort of like, you know, pretty quick conclusion once you look under the hood. But what happened is that I started running these inference trials on ChatGPT, every couple of weeks, and mostly it failed. Like very simple, like logic puzzles, like dual processing, like Daniel Kahneman style, like the ball and the bat puzzle, stuff like that. It just couldn't get them until in November. I ran a series of trials of 37 different inference tasks, and it got 34 of them correctly. And I'm like, whoa, because that's this architecture shouldn't be able to do that, and yet now it does. So it's really kind of like having an open mind enough to entertain that this is really sort of going to places that a couple of years ago were really hard to predict, and yet you also have to have a kind of critical, like sort of cool-headed attitude that you don't get into this whole Silicon Valley, this AGI hype, robots taking over like by Christmas sort of stuff, because that's actually not, at least unless I'm completely out of it, like super realistic if you look at what's actually happening in the architecture. So this is kind of like, this is like, I think this combination of getting excited, like, about the change, but then also keeping this kind of like cool academic attitude. So it's sort of like, I think it's quite a lot of fun.
That's a good point. Can you kind of like maybe give Mike an example of one or two of those inference trials that you did that really made you kind of like appreciate these new developments?
So well, one of the things that I've been running different variations of is the kind of like the classical heuristic test about the ball and the bat, which obviously you can't run in itself because, like, basically you can just probably like draw the conclusion from the training data. So I've been running variations. I think there was something like some stuff that you're purchasing and they have a combined value, and then you have to draw inference about like the difference. And human beings even get, I mean, Daniel Kahneman, the dual processing psychologist, like made the point that even like Harvard, like top schoolers, they usually get this wrong. GPT-3 gets it wrong systematically. GPT-4 got it wrong until end of November, like around mid-November. It was around the time of the big revamp when OpenAI consolidated all the kind of like the plugin architecture into this more automatic system. And after that, it started getting it correctly. So that was one example, like, so, okay. And then I just ran like, Aristotelic syllogisms, like, just basic stuff, just trying to like, create wordings that wouldn't be in the training data. I have this obscure Finnish logic book that I haven't been ever able to find online. So I think that's pretty safe to use for this type of stuff. But if you think about a human being doing 37 variously demanding logical puzzles and only getting 3 of them wrong, that's actually, you have to be pretty smart as a human to be able to crack that. So that's an interesting discrepancy there, because because an LLM basically doesn't have explicit syntax. None of the content that it generates, it doesn't have any syntactical framework into which it attaches it. It's all probabilistic. It's all basically 100% semantic relationships between words in the training data. That's the kind of the short condensed version of what happens there. So it shouldn't be able to draw inference, because inference is basically understanding complicated syntactical relationships. And yet now it does. So my academic guess, because OpenAI became closed AI and they're not publishing what's happening under the hood anymore, but my guess is that they're using some kind of a modular architecture where they're offloading some of this more analytic thinking into some kind of a syntactical. They have an analytic engine there. That's explicit, that we know, and it used to be like something you could select from before they integrated into the new version. So I think it offloads that to something else. But I don't know. If you guys know what's going on down there, I would be really interested in finding out. But I know OpenAI has been pretty mum about that lately. So.
Have you looked into other models? Like Bard or Claude or so, if they can do that or not? Because there's this talk now of, let's say, emergent properties of GPT-4-like models, but it's all kind of emerging right now, so nobody probably really knows.
Yeah. So all the trials I've run on Bard have been sub GPT-3 levels, so it hasn't really performed that well. We don't have access to Claude in Finland, or at least last time I checked, so that I haven't been able to try out any of the Anthropic stuff.
Mistral?
Inflection, sorry?
Sorry, Mistral?
The what? Mistral?
The French model, or the European star?
Yeah, I haven't been able to try out Mistral. I did a local installation on my phone, but it turns out that my phone doesn't have enough GPU power to be able to run that.
That will come.
Well, the couple of elements that I've been able to tinker around with, I think inflection is one of the most promising ones. And inflection, especially now, they claim that the inflection 2 and 2.5, we don't have that in Finland either yet, but that at least like seems to be on par with GPT-4 with benchmarks. Claude 3 obviously as well, like, at least that's what they claim. And then I don't know, Gemini is kind of an outlier because Bard was kind of like not really great at all. And Gemini is sort of like, at least the benchmark seems to indicate that the Ultra model would be competitive with GPT-4, but it's also a bit kind of, I'm not really like, I haven't been trying it out that much yet. But the thing is like, that if you think about like, once again, looping back to LLMs and inference, I mean, I really don't see like, the amount of fine tuning you would need to put into that to make it able to have 100% hit rate with like logical, like basically any syntactic tasks. I don't know if it's a feasible thing to do unless there's something that I just don't get about how the architecture works, and that's why I think like the whole like the likely solution to this, and now if somebody knows a bit more about like what's happening in OpenAI, would be some kind of a modular structure. Because I mean, traditional computers are great with syntactic structure. I mean, that's what these things do to begin with. So there's an interesting sort of discrepancy between what's happening with an LLM and these systems.
Cool. I'll hop back into kind of like a slightly bigger picture topic for a little while, and then we can jump back into the details again. So I think, Daniel, you had a nice intro to kind of like now this being kind of like the industrial revolution for the mind. And I think as those of us who are working on innovation-related topics, as most of the audience is, and obviously you, Daniel, especially have been working on this, what are kind of like the use cases or the areas within innovation and innovation management that you're the most excited about with, I guess, mostly the new Gen AI development, but in AI in general as well?
I wouldn't even know where to start in this sense. What's the most exciting one? Because of course you have all these efficiency gains. Yeah, instead of reading through hundreds of pages of news or whatever, you can have the AI help you with it. Yes, filter it out. You have the semantic search, and then I don't know, these RAG applications. I mean, all of these things, they seem kind of trivial. I mean, they just need to get going so you as a human can do more. But then, of course, you can also go into features. I mean, if you go to Miro, for example, you have a brainstorming feature with AI. We haven't really used it so much. And my impression was always that it doesn't really do much more right now than humans would brainstorm. It's just faster, right? And you can do more of it. And then you have more work to filter it out again. You can use the AI to filter it. But most of this is still in that 80% what humans would do, or if you just have a group of 10 people. But the really crazy thing, I think you can also like squeeze it out of the model if you work more and more and more with it, probabilistically turn up the temperature. And this is interesting because you can do things that you wouldn't do because humans are too lazy. We don't want to spend 1,000 hours on something. But with AI, we can just spend 1,000 hours on something and we have it in 20 minutes or in, I don't know, 2 hours or overnight. So that kind of makes it very interesting. And then from that part, you can build it everywhere into tools, into software that we have. That makes this part super exciting. And for innovators, if you're in the digital space and AI writes that little mock-up tool for you instead of you doing it yourself, that's cool. Yeah, you can iterate through stuff much faster. And I think that's probably for the innovation managers in most cases the most exciting part, because usually you don't have much resources. But with AI, you just get so many more resources. You have these thousands of interns who you just let loose on a problem, and then you figure out the value faster. So yeah, I guess that's where I see it right now. Yeah.
Cool. Laura, anything to add to that or comment?
Yeah, I mean, like I think in the sort of innovation process in general, I think there are lots of really interesting and exciting use cases, and that's actually one of the best use cases for LLM from a practical point of view. I think what I'm seeing here in Finland is that many people, I mean, even quite educated people, they go fire up ChatGPT, ask it the question, often like, a question about themselves or some of their work. It gets the facts like haphazardly or like really badly wrong, and then they kind of go and declare this system as a non-functional, like non-issue because it gets facts wrong. And I think that's one of the sort of like things that I've been trying to work with a lot in the last couple of months, is like, kind of like building the understanding that LLM-based systems aren't actually really great for like, information retrieval, because once again, they generate the output, they don't retrieve it. They don't, unless you have a search engine plugged into it, it doesn't actually even have access to the training data per se. It only has the weights in the system. But then in innovation, in like in brainstorming, ideation, I think like this is where I personally get the most mileage out of this. Like, just have a vague idea and you start crafting different kinds of like sequences of prompts and try to get, like, give me 10 ideas about this, and or like, here's a paper I wrote about this topic. Can you give me like 5 ideas about how to like, condense this into a blog post or something like that? So that's really something where you get a lot of mileage out of that. And it tends to be that usually when you are able to be the final arbiter of the factual content of whatever output you're dealing with, or the factual output doesn't really matter. I mean, I use ChatGPT to help me teach code with Python. I have some background with Turbo Pascal from like my teenage years and basic and stuff like that. But then I just asked it to be a Python coach, and with like, whether it gets, I mean, some of the functions that it offered me at some point were pretty archaic and I couldn't really, have them run in my IDE, but like, many of them did work. So, I mean, it doesn't matter if it doesn't get the facts straight when it's teaching me Python, because I still get the basic vibe of the architecture well enough to be able to write programs with it, which I now can, which is, 6 months after trying, starting working with this, is pretty cool. So and then like I'm like, once again, given my background, I'm a bit wary still. I mean, 2 years ago I would have said that we shouldn't talk about artificial intelligence, or if we do, it should be equated with the scientific research in machine learning. So that would be kind of like, a proper use for this term. Now I'm sort of fine with it, but even better terminology, like, to distance us a bit from this sort of AGI, like artificial general intelligence, or this or autonomous thinking machines discourse. I think we should talk about augmented intelligence, because that's what ChatGPT, that all the LLMs, that's what they are. All the diffusion-based image creation platforms, they're augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence, because you don't have any output from these systems if you don't have an input from a human user. And even like, with AutoGPT or these some trials that people have been trying, they don't really, I mean, you still have to have a human somehow framing what should happen with this system. And it's the funny thing that all of these sort of like, oh, it's just really bad for searching facts about myself, like sort of things. They go off the table when you realize that, like, this sort of garbage in, garbage out equation, like, that if your prompt is bad and you don't follow up with, clarifying prompts, you probably get bad outputs. But if your prompt, and my personal experience, it's a kind of trial and error. I mean, there's all this prompt engineering stuff going online, and you should, tip it $200 and stuff like that. I don't know, like, it's sort of, I know it makes for a groovy Twitter or LinkedIn post, but I mean, the factuality of that stuff is sort of, I mean, there was a research paper where the tipping actually, at least statistically, seems to work. But what I've found is the best way is to kind of like just tinker with it. Like, just throw out the prompt, see if the output is something you want to see. If not, then, keep on working with the initial prompt until you get something that works. And then the other thing is that, like, ChatGPT and all of these LLMs, they're not built into this singular question answer format, but into a chatbot format. And the very reason is because the context window, like for GPT-4, the context window is, last I checked, was like 100,000 tokens or something like that. So like, I mean, you can put a lot of stuff into that to get an output that matters. But all of this is more, it's not about artificial intelligence. It's not about the robot stealing our job. It's about the human and this beautiful mathematical / linguistic architecture interacting with one another in a way that can lead our thinking to whole new places. And that's why I think, like, for like ideation and innovation, it's sort of like an augmented system one, augmented like non-conscious mind, but instead of it's having been configured through neuroplasticity and by our life experience, it's being configured through 225 billion words lifted out of the internet. So that's sort of like, the way I'm kind of like looking at that. But ideation, coaching, sparring, like these are the types of use cases where we're really like seeing a massive like increasing mileage. And there's a bunch of really interesting papers also. There was a paper run by Harvard Business School a few months or about 6 months ago, where they worked with Boston Consulting Group consultants, and they were able to demonstrate that in the ideation types of tasks, like generating new product ideas for a customer, they were able to increase the total productivity in 20-25% range, and the quality of the work went up based on this external assessment. I think it was 17 to 43% based on their initial scores without GPT. So I think this is the opportunity, and the sooner we get to the point where we kind of like step away from this bad search engine like sort of kind of metaphor and realize like what is the real life actual like potential in real work in leveraging these things, I think the better we'll be off.
Yeah, I think that brings us to an interesting point, which is that for this to become kind of like a big topic that large organizations really benefit from in terms of like being able to scale the work right now, like you said, that it requires quite a bit of, let's say, tinkering and individual expertise with doing that work. So I think a lot of potential comes to being able to really make the process easier for the end user and being able to, let's say, guide the system in the right way through a lot of different situations. So I think it's an interesting field.
Yeah, I mean, if you look also at the development of the tools that we are getting, yeah, so you have this chat-based interface, whatever is behind the chat, but it's very individual. It doesn't scale beyond me, but I can use it for almost anything, right? Then you have these hybrids like Microsoft Copilot, where you can maybe make PowerPoint slides using Copilot, but it kind of doesn't work yet because it's not integrated that much into PowerPoint itself, but also into what I want on a visual language or whatever. But this is coming probably. But then you also have this stuff that's completely automated, where you have you have a script and it takes 200 hours of video and creates a book with content from it, and you don't interact with it anymore. And I guess right now we're all in the stage where this chat interface that's available and you can try it out, and this is so powerful because if your first prompt is wrong, you see the output and you correct it immediately, whereas in that automated part you don't want it to run, I don't know, $100 through the sink basically until you realize it's doing something wrong. Yeah. And then in between, this is really where everybody's still struggling how to get it. Even Microsoft with probably thousands of coders behind it. But I mean, the speed is coming. But on that individual part, I see a lot of my colleagues struggling with this thing. Yeah, because the search engine, we know it's not a search engine. So okay, if we leave that off the table with the I don't know, exceptions of the search engines actually that are built into it, like Bing or whatever. It really takes some mindset shift to start using it. Yeah. So I tell people, try AI first. Whatever you do, the first thing is you go to the chat and you use it like a coach. So look, I need to do this. How could I do this? And because this interaction actually gets you the experience where you see how it could help you. It's an extended thinking bench, not the workbench, but in a thinking bench. You have an idea and then it's like criticize the hell out of this. Or I don't know. You can get all the different personas. Yeah, be a pirate. Be with the Pope. Be Jesus. What would Jesus say to my idea? I mean, you have all that. You can play with it. But then you also come to other things where it's like, okay, generate 100 product names for me or 100 ideas. Or we're thinking of, I don't know, generate ideas for an ideation campaign as seed starting material. Yeah. Or maybe even just coach the people who they come with ideas or proposals for projects, and you just let the AI coach them to make it better or ask questions. What is missing in the proposal? And these are all the things that humans could do if you get their time, but we know human time is expensive, but the AI is not in that case. And you can do so much more. And it's quite fascinating, yeah. But it really, people need to switch to that. It's not another human that will help you, but the output will help you to be a better human, yeah, in a way. It's kind of funny.
I love the thinking bench. Can I quote you on that?
Yeah,
I
of
think
course.
thinking bench, not a workbench. I think that's a really great metaphor. Like I just like I think one thing that I would love to. I mean, I agree with basically everything you say, and one of my own experiences has been that like just sort of having this kind of like tinkering attitude to crafting prompts and like to work with the context window. I think that's really crucial to getting the mileage out of this. And one example case is my brother is a pretty established game designer in Finland, and he was working on some project, and then he posted in our family WhatsApp like that he's actually thinking about canceling the ChatGPT Plus subscription because he doesn't really get quality output from that. And then I'm asking him like, and he's super tech savvy, like he was like one of the first people I knew running Stable Diffusion beta back like a couple of years ago and stuff like that. So I'm like wondering like, so what's up? And then we kind of like came up with this idea that he needs like 10 titles for a science fiction based like mobile game. And then when you go to ChatGPT and you ask it like, can you give me 10 ideas for title for sci-fi mobile game, and they all suck. There's like, void form fighter X or something like that. So they're all kind of really banal, really self-evident, and just kind of nothing like professional people would come up with. But then I kept tinkering with the context and started adding more flavor to that and going like, that, okay, so could you maybe like draw some influence from, and then I just dropped in like 10 like Ian Banks, Orson Scott Card, like a bunch of sci-fi books, like that it might have in the training data, and they were marginally better, but still pretty boring. But the interesting twist was that then I asked it to revise the names by using some influence from either Latin, Swahili, or Japanese. And that's like all of a sudden, like it really blew up into this, because that's when the sort of like the whole sort of like probabilistic architecture sort of like I didn't even like at that point even know how to adjust the temperature in ChatGPT. This was like 8-9 months ago, but like, or about a year ago. But it just kind of blew up the whole sort of like probability space into a whole new level, because having something like Orson Scott Card sci-fi mobile game in Swahili, and then all of a sudden like how you're dealing with that with respect to the training data became really interesting. It output something that had lots of like actually individual words picked from these different languages, and then where the penny dropped was when I asked to translate all of that back to straight English, and then we had 10 titles that were actually pretty amazing. I
Wow.
shared them to my brother, and he was like, "Oh, okay, so maybe I won't cancel this after all." So that, but it took. I mean, the amount of human input that you still sort of need to put into that system to make it work is not, it may be quite substantial time and again, but this sort of like, just kind of playing back and forth with it, just, by virtue of having an access to a set of weights that's in the ballpark of like 175 billion for GPT-3, and I don't know what billion or trillion for GPT-4, is a kind of a, it's a really great sort of springboard for ideas, or like that's why I love the thinking bench idea, like something where you put your brain into and start like working with that. So
And I like your approach to design that process basically to get some meaningful, interesting output. And while you were explaining, I was thinking of like how much are these models alike? So because if you go into Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or whatever they're called, right? There are these magic words, the incantations in a way, like in the style of, and
yeah,
some of them are actually, they produce good output, but they are factually wrong. Like, I don't know, lens, whatever. You give it something, but it does something completely different. Every photographer says, well, this is wrong, right? It's not working. But what happens is you have this multi-million dimensional space, and you kind of direct the random generation, what happens, to a subspace of that. And depending on which words, you cut it differently. And that is the crazy thing. And I think working with the images gives you a different way of understanding how the words can bring different output, and then you can apply that to text again. And this example with Japanese and Swahili that's exactly the thing, where like you do a picture and then you say in the style of, and then it opens a completely new space and it multiplies it into it, and that's super fascinating. Yeah, but it's also crazy what kind of stereotypes you have in the model. So I've been working with transcript to document processing, and it's like you just change one word. Write this as a protocol, like in a lab, then it even adds formatting and date of experiment, experimenter, etc. That comes automatically. And you just change that word from protocol to wiki article. It's different. You write it to blog post to marketing copy, and it changes the format just because that single word, basically. Maybe it's, I don't know what the smallest increment is, that way you can change the output completely, but it's really crazy. And with pictures the same. So I like to play or try to make pictures of tango dancers, because that's a hobby of mine. And there's so much stereotype, and if you just say tango, you get always the same stereotype from all the different models, and you really need to kind of push it and squeeze it in order to get something non-stereotypical. But it's fun, yeah.
Yep.
But they have limits, yeah, the models.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, kind of like how that ties into also how generally the human mind works. So it's also kind of like new ideas are always like a combination of some existing things.
Yep.
But like Laura, you touched earlier, it is kind of like for humans, it's always kind of like specific to your own background and your situation. But for the LLMs, it's a collection of all of our collective consciousness. So it's kind of like it comes with these stereotypes, and you have to learn how to work with it.
If you read the OpenAI paper on RLHF from 2022, the reinforced learning from human feedback, they're actually describing pretty intricately how they were, one of the motivations for going this way was to try to start rooting out the biases and the sort of the misalignment in the model. And it's kind of sad but true is that whatever biases are in the training data, they will get reflected in the model as well, and working fine-tuning the weights to get rid of that is not super easy. But I'm definitely if you compare GPT-3 and GPT-4 with this respect, for example, I think they've done a pretty impressive job in getting rid of a big bunch of that sort of biased behavior.
Yep. They're even putting now too much bias or whatever. And I mean, all the complaints that the image models are becoming woke, because now you say, okay, I want a picture of a pope, and then you get colored people as a pope, and say that's never happened. That's not historically correct. Maybe not, but it's in the model now. Yeah, so it's the stereotype from the data.
Yeah. But I think that's then it's a whole other sort of discussion, like the whole ethics of how we should be weighting the different I mean, there's no neutral system, there's no neutral human being. I mean, we all have our backgrounds and our histories and everything, and then I think this woke discussion is interesting from that perspective. That I think there was a Netflix show that portrayed a historical setting where there were lots of colored people, and that gave a big backlash. But then again, if that actually leads to society being more acceptable for diversity and difference in people, I mean, it's an ethical question. Is historical accuracy more important than people being decent to one another? And if sacrificing some degree of historical accuracy gives us more decency in people, I'm not taking a stand here. I'm just saying that ethically it's a very interesting question to think about.
Absolutely. I'd like to take us a little bit back into kind of then what are the areas that you're interested in exploring in the future, especially when it comes to innovation. So what are the things that you'd like to explore or work on next or in the future when the capabilities do evolve or graduate?
Ooh. I mean, this will. So maybe it's a little detour, but it's something to think about actually. There is a certain dilemma right now because it's moving so fast. You really need to figure out where you want to spend your time on and where you want to invest in, or where you can just wait until technology has caught up with it, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I think most of the things are based mostly on learning, not really on developing a product, because that learning will help you all the way into the future as well, because you kind of understand what's happening. And of course, I think in my area, let's say knowledge management, etc., it's really about text processing and video processing to get knowledge in a form that other people can benefit from it. So it's more this human to human transfer and building an archive and maybe also these search parts. But this is also, let's say, it can be very specific, but that's something a lot of people are working on, right? So you could also say, let's just wait for 1 year and then buy something. In general, with innovation, I personally know from my experience, like coding with AI makes me a 10 times better programmer. I'm not a programmer, I'm a hobbyist, right? But now I can do projects that I would never have touched before. And innovation, you always need this MVP, this POC, where you try out an idea and then you actually test it in the market. And this, I think, will be the next thing where you use AI in order to build these MVPs faster, in order to find something valuable faster. And then, of course, we will all benefit from that.
Yep. One thing that I like, or two things that I've been very perplexed about last, I don't know, 4 to 8 weeks. So first of all, like, I mean, last year was crazy. So I mean, like, I think all through the year, especially leading up to the sort of like the OpenAI implosion, like the whole sort of like launch of this consolidated GPT-4 and the GPT agents and all of that, like all the events that led to that, it felt like, that, okay, so we've come to the future, we've come to this weird place where almost like on a weekly basis, some big, like Mid-Journey version 5, like, in the spring, that was just like, just when you thought that, you just, I'm still wrapping my head around kind of like, that, okay, so this diffusion stuff really like, put this to a new level, like compared to all the GAN stuff or stuff like that came before. And then the version 5 was just like this whole photorealistic content you can generate with it. I'm like, okay, wow. And all of this, I mean, like Runway, like, introducing this sort of like text to video. I mean, it's still clunky as beep, but still kind of like, was impressive. Okay, now you can do video. But last 2 or 3 months, I can't really for the life of me name a single. I mean, the only thing that pops to my head is like Sora, but that's, that's a proof of that's demo video, and you have to be really skeptical and really like, take all of the, like Gemini is a good example. Like, Google really burnt their fingers with this, like, fake Gemini video that they launched before Christmas. So even though OpenAI has been probably the only company, well, OpenAI Mid-Journey maybe the only companies who have really lived up to the expectation they've set with their marketing. Even then, I mean, especially given that there is a lot of turmoil going internally in the company, I would be a bit, I would just advise caution. And, I may burn my fingers with this one when Sora launches, but like, demos are different from actual working products. That's just fact of life about technology development. So that's like one observation about it. And then the other thing, like something, Daniel, you said earlier, like in the very beginning, that struck me, like, is that, like basically working with corporate people in Finland, I think the general sentiment seems to be that people are they're kind of like taking a step back, they're observing the situation, they're quite cautious, but they're still slightly worried about this, like, what if the competitor gets the advantage? And you said in the beginning that, this is like a potentially massive market disruptor. What really perplexes me from a practical point of view is that it's precisely that. I mean, looking at the research now on the productivity leaps that you can do on a controlled empirical experiment, we're talking about double-digit percentages almost without exception. Like whatever research I've got my hands on, we're talking about like 20 to 60% ballpark, which translates to 1 to 3 days a week per employee, which translates to just crazy profit opportunity. But I'm not seeing the market disruption there. I mean, yeah, the Google layoffs, the LinkedIn layoffs, they probably have something to do with what's going on in this space. But the sort of like, the huge practical application where people would actually be able to generate consistently the types of outputs that correlate with this lab data, or it's not lab data, but this empirical, like, research data, it's not yet at least and it may be like, it may be that we're looking at the tsunami and it hits us in the summer or something like that. That's, that's actually probably something like that's in the works.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, where is the disruption right now? Where is it hiding?
I think the first case that I saw that was actually like at least reported by a company in real life that really caught my eye was from Klarna. So I think they mentioned some, I forgot the exact figures, but some pretty impressive results from their customer service in terms of like being able to improve customer satisfaction while taking on, I think it was in the ballpark of 70% or something of their effort or something. So.
One thing, I mean, also in terms of technological progression, maybe there is something like a glass ceiling on GPT-4 kind of level AI, and reaching the next level is really difficult. Maybe it's impossible because we've already put all text that humans have generated into it, and we don't have any more training data. But what's really interesting, I think, what will happen is now there's the open source models, and I think Meta kind of accelerated a lot by just open sourcing their llama model basically. But now there's all these other derivatives of that and newly trained open source models, and people making them smaller and also run on mobile phones. Yeah.
Yep.
So that edge AI, when you have your own AI, you can align it with what you want to do. That's gonna have some impact in products. And we still don't know what Apple is doing. This is like, when are they finally launching Siri 2? I mean, I'm waiting for at least rumors, but nothing.
That's a really, really important observation. Like, what's up with those guys? I mean, and that's the funny thing, because I mean, like, the fact that the sort of like the societal level, or the kind of like, the structural level disruption is not there, at least materialized quite yet. I mean, it's also a fact that these things do work, and they, I'm not saying like, I mean, I'm saying that I think it is a generalizable fact that you can get double-digit productivity gains by using systems like this. But the adoption curve is really kind of, it's not, obviously, because everything moved so fast last year, so it's weird. But Apple, like, using Siri, using autocorrect when you can go to ChatGPT, or like, I don't know if you guys have tried the Pi, the UI for inflection, but like, you should give it a spin, because that's like, that's like some next level stuff going on there. And the inflection one was sort of like GPT-3 level model that I think is still like, there's I think there's some variation of that that's plugging into the app that's available here in Finland right now. But the fact is that Pi is my first personal experience where you consistently can have meaningful discussions with a machine. And I'm not talking about just having a chat, but because the whole system is integrated into this kind of phone call like interface. So it actually looks like you're having a call. And I often, I put it on when I'm driving a car. And just like, the other day I was driving from another city in Finland for about an hour and a half. And I chatted with this thing for an hour. And it was fun. It was great. I learned a lot of things. Not all of it may be, factually correct. But then at some point it struck me that it's kind of like, giving a call to some academically savvy friend. Like, they might not, I'm on the phone call, they might not get all the facts straight either. I mean, humans, errare humanum est, or whatever, like, but you have this interface that, compared to Siri or Alexa or like, whatever, it's just in a whole different ballpark. And it's there, it works. It's like, every single one of you guys on this call can download it straight away after this session and give it a spin. And the only thing, there's a slight delay whenever it calculates the response, but once you get to the rhythm of that, even that doesn't really throw you off the illusion. And it's a really, really strong illusion that you're having a conversation with another person. And this is like something that really, I mean, I think GPT-4 is still sort of like the state of the art with respect to performance and the quality of outputs. But the fact that these guys have taken a slightly different tact, and they've programmed the LLM, for example, to be able to behave human-like. Like, you ask it, how are you doing? And it says, hey, like, like I'm doing great. I'm hanging around here in the virtual cloud, having great conversations with people all over the world. So you get this vibe, like, that, hey, okay, so, that I'm actually having conversation with somebody. And even when you know that it's an LLM driven voice synthesizer. It's kind of like, I think it's a bit of a glimpse of like, where these things can get. And given how things are developing, they may get there, sooner than we think.
The ChatGPT phone app also has that. And the first time I heard it, it was like, wow, what is that voice? Because it's broken. It's not the synthetic, smooth,
Yep.
monotonous thing, but it has these little quirks in it. It really feels like talking to a real person, and you have a transcript afterwards of the conversation as well. It's really amazing. I mean, we are all Star Trek fans, right?
Yep,
Computer.
yep. Yeah.
Awesome. With that, let's move on to the audience questions. I think so far we have just a couple. So if you still have some questions, please feel free to add those to the chat there. I think the first one was pretty much in the beginning, Lauri, for you. So there was a question about, do we need to become machine behavior specialists and really continuously updating our mental model of the AI application that we're working with? So I think we touched on this a little bit already, but do you have anything to maybe add to what we've previously discussed?
Machine learning. So can you repeat the question?
So the comment is, I like Lauri's puzzle book test more than the technical side. I'm curious what it means for us as users from a social science perspective. Do we need to become machine behavior specialists, continuously updating our mental model of the AI application that we're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, specialist is probably the wrong word, but I think it's really crucial, and I think this is, I'm a bit worried about like the social impact of this thing, because I think we're not seeing the disruption en masse yet, but I think there is a massive potential for pretty divisive social situation. Like, if you think about that, some double-digit percentage of the workforce starts getting these productivity gains, and then the rest of people don't. And the whole sort of like, the way job markets work, employment works. I mean, would you hire somebody who puts down, twice the quality and 4 times the speed, rather than somebody who doesn't? And this is a real situation. And so one thing that I've been spending a lot of time here in Finland with is that I think people really need to understand how these things work. The media is full. So, I mean, if we talk about ChatGPT hallucinating, you look at mainstream media. I mean, for crying out loud, New York Times, you read pieces there that the facts are just so achingly wrong about how they describe how these things work, and this sort of like, unwanted misinformation really leads people to think that these things are either these magic button things that replace us completely, or just complete junk, and they're really neither. So I think, like, just getting people up to speed and educated en masse about, like, that what is the, I think the Harvard paper is amazing, because they really specify this kind of like, that there is a space of application for these which can see massive productivity gains, but you can't universalize that, and you really need to be mindful about, like, that in some, and one of the data points that they drew from that research was that in applications where LLMs are not a suitable tool, you got almost 20% drop in the quality of the work. So this is like, that's just getting people up to speed about, like, where can you actually use this, like we've discussed already, like several times, like ideation stuff that's not like directly fact dependent, and then where you shouldn't use them are things where you need to have like complicated inferential structures, where you need to have factual content that you can't validate yourself as a subject matter expert. So that's when you should steer clear of these types of tools. So just, sorry, long and convoluted answer to the first question, but I think
I would probably
yes.
still go back to it, actually, because I mean, this, do we need to become machine behavior specialists? Do we need to continuously update our mental model? So what's happening right now, I think, is that a lot of these base models and the interface are becoming more human-like. So we have a conversation with them.
Yep.
And since that is happening, we don't need to become machine learning specialists, because as humans, we usually adopt our mental models of our peers, of our friends, of our family all the time anyway. So, and that makes it difficult in a way to differentiate, because we attribute human elements to these things, especially if they sound like human, or if they get a machine generated avatar and I have a video call with my AI. So is it really human or not? And maybe you put the real face on it, whatever. So this is the thing where we need to be cautious for, that this is AI and it's not human. But I think our brains are already built in that way that we will probably update it until we are fooled, of course. Yeah. And then the robots take over the world.
Cool. Let's move on to the next one. So when Laura, you shared the example with product names, we had a comment from Rex thanking you for the example and wanting to hear more of those. So kind of like, let's say, work situation related, people interaction related, kind of like examples that come into mind. Any experiments or thoughts from either of you that you think would be worth sharing?
Yeah, I think like this is kind of typical sort of like system one situation. Like I'm just thinking like because I basically use this tool on a daily basis. So just trying to single out like, okay, so what would be the but so so a couple of things where I've got lots of mileage out of this is like just like social media content creation is one, like, you know, that I have lots of different content I want to share with people. I pretty much suck with, like, you know, Twitter and LinkedIn and all of that. So just kind of like getting that massive data condensed into something that actually creates public, you know, drives public engagement. I don't think that's a great use case for these types of things. But there you really, once again, I mean, it takes a bit of tinkering to get out. I mean, the outputs tend to be pretty flat and kind of American, sort of like, ooh, everything's amazing, like wonderful. And so you really have to, I mean, one of my favorite like follow-up prompts actually with working with social media content is, can you make it less American? So, I mean, that seems to work pretty well. And then like basically, one great example, by the way, was that we got pretty great mileage out of this. So when we were creating the learning objectives for my unit, and we have about 20 people working in that unit, we're teaching basically our pretty like technically leaning university students about startup entrepreneurship in that unit. And we needed to find like about half a dozen learning objectives for the next curriculum period. And our team came up with 20. And the human brain power in the room, having 20 people with 20 learning objectives, and everybody has their baby on the table, nobody wants to back off from, like, you know, I need to get this stuff there. So me and Mary, who's the lead teacher in our or in that team, we took those 20 to ChatGPT and asked it to condense them to, you know, 5 to 7 options, and it gave us a pretty okay output, but the output wording was consultees. And in academia, like, you know, we're really allergic to this kind of like consult jargon generation stuff. So one that was a really cool moment as well. So we were looking at it, we asked it to rephrase it, tried a couple of different prompts, and then the one that really did the trick was like, you know, can you kick out the jargon? Like, can you just remove the jargon words from the learning goals? And then we got about 5 of them, and all the teachers in the team were like, yeah, I mean, we can commit to this. So it's again the augmented intelligence, like, you know, that is the brain power in the team, uh, having GPT help us, like, you know, find the sort of diamond in that, putting it back to human review, and then the human review kind of comes back with this, okay, so this back and forth has given us actually pretty amazing learning objectives that are now baked into a major we have at the university, into the teaching program in the unit, and things like that. And I don't think we would have got that great outputs with just the human brain power. So just a couple of like examples now. Daniel, you might have something, because I think you guys are working with some cool stuff there. So
I mean, yeah, that's the thing. There's so many small things. I mean, just like help me solve a problem or walk me through it. Yeah, if it's a new app or you want to build a Power App flow, or I don't know, plan a party. I mean, these planning things, there's a lot of structure in it for individuals. Text summarization, text translation. Translation, actually, we've realized that it's not so nice. Like tools like DeepL are better because they are more predictable and not as random. Especially if you want to translate something, then you want it the same all the time. I found not the use cases. It's really it's an umbrella. It just depends on where you are. It's like this. Try to be AI first and just spend those 20 seconds on getting some inspiration or getting yourself out of out of your usual, let's say, thinking loop. I think that's one of the key parts for individuals on that part. I don't know. I mean, there's the small things that like generate an email and generate images for your presentations. That's fun always, and it kind of gets it out of the usual thing. And I think that's one of the superpowers of AI. You can, even though you feel like it's always the same, but you can trick it into a corner where it's different, where it accesses different words or different mindset or different content that you don't have access to.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are not the product of, or maybe fortunately, of billions of words trained into and burned into our brains. Yeah, we are more consistent.
I think that's actually a great place to stop for now. So we're right at the hour mark right now. So at this point, I want to thank both of our guests and all of you for participating here today. So unfortunately, we didn't get through all of the questions, and I think we got a few comments already requesting a follow-up session. So I think we need to take a round 2 at some point. So we will work on that. And for the time being, if you're interested in like a topic at large and also want to catch Daniel's next session, we are having him also join us for the Innovate conference in April. And for all of you participants here, we also have a little bit of a discount code available for you if you're interested in participating in there. We'll share that and the recording with all of you via email, and we'll also link some of these resources and materials that we had mentioned during the session. So thanks again, everybody, and hope you have a pleasant rest of the day.